This is Ascocentrum christensonianum. It is described as an epiphytic monopodial orchid native to lowland forests of Vietnam. It is a vandaceous orchid, and like all Vandas, it likes things warm to hot. And I am personally growing it as such, although in winter time, my grow room does get pretty chilly, as low as 17 degrees Celsius. But it seems to be absolutely okay for this orchid. For me, it blooms once a year, typically in springtime. I'm uploading this in March, so that makes it the beginning of spring for me, but it might be slightly different for you depending on your environment. The flowers are breathtaking, but they're very, very tiny. I think it's the Vanda with the tiniest flowers, if not the orchid with the tiniest flowers that I have in my collection. Each flower is about 1 centimeter across. It's a soft, light pink and has no fragrance. The coloration can differ from person to person and from care to care. I find that the more established the orchid is, the better I am on top of fertilizing, the better the flowers as well. But there is also natural variation, so you can expect this orchid to have all shades of pink, from very light, almost white pink, to a little bit more of a magenta pink. And if you grow it under pink grow lights, it looks even pinkier. I grow my vandaceous orchids potted, but it's absolutely fine to grow it bare-rooted or mounted as well. It is an epiphyte, so that gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to the potting setup, or the non-potting setup. I water it whenever it's thoroughly dry because it is very, very tolerant to drought. So I can afford to keep it potted in the same medium for longer. Mine has been sitting in the same medium for about 3 years, but this year it's time to repot since it's already outgrowing her pot. My medium of choice is an organic mix of bark and sphagnum moss, but any type of medium can work if it works for your other epiphytes. I try to give it as much light as possible. It is a Vanda, and Vandas absolutely love strong light, but I grow it strictly under artificial light. It doesn't really get any natural light, and I haven't found this to be detrimental in any way. Furthermore, you can see the pink tinges on the leaves. This is anthocyanin, and in the case of Vandas, it is a good sign. It means it receives adequate strong light. I fertilize it together with my other orchids. This will depend on the fertilizer you use. It can be once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, depends on each fertilizer. But I don't find it has any weird preferences. It is just like any other Vanda, just miniature. I purchased it when it was a very tiny seedling, but in time this orchid can grow pretty tall. Although width-wise it will never grow wider than this. It can produce keikis at the base typically, so it can become a little bit bushier, but in the end this orchid will be tall and pretty narrow. Typically, most of the year I have anywhere between 23 degrees Celsius to 28 or even 30 degrees Celsius in my grow room, and that's absolutely fine for all of my Vandas, including the christensonianum. This orchid does not take a winter rest. Water reduction is purely based on the temperature inside my grow room, which makes water evaporate slower. I keep the schedule. Whenever this orchid is thoroughly dry, I give it a good watering. This happens before the leaves get wrinkly. The time in between waterings absolutely doesn't matter because it will be different for each of us. So there's no point in telling you I water it once a week because that would be false. Bottom line, if you can take care of any Vanda, I don't see how you will have issues with this particular orchid. It behaves like any other typical Vanda, and if you get it as a seedling or already potted, you will have great chances to convert it to a potted system if that's what you're looking for. I have no issues growing it as such, and this year it's warming my heart with 2 beautiful flower spikes. I think in the future it can create even more than this. It's still a young plant, but I do really love it, even if it's the tiniest flowered orchid that I have. And that's it. See you next time. Bye! This is Phalaenopsis orchid world variety Bonnie Vasquez, a complex Phalaenopsis hybrid which leans more towards the Polychilus subgenus since 75% of its parentage are orchids in the Polychilus subgenus. This is one of my absolute favorite Phalaenopsis hybrids. I'm sure the images speak for themselves, but I'm gonna try to say a few words about it as well. First and foremost, the flowers are absolutely striking. They're a beautiful yellow goldeny color which stands out in the crowd. It is very vivid. I'm not a particularly big fan of pale yellow or green yellow colors, but this one is more golden, so I really like it. The pattern though is quite unique. As you can see, we're not talking about dots like many Phalaenopsis actually have. It is a lining type of a pattern, which I find resembles more the Amboinensis parent rather than anything else. The shape of the flower is quite rounded and symmetrical. It has a beautiful daisy type of shape. This is how I call these rounded Phalaenopsis flowers. It is a very sturdy, waxy type of flower. It is not thin and fluffy like the typical flower shop Phalaenopsis orchids. And bonus, it does have a bit of a fragrance. It is quite mild, a bit sour and fruity, reminds of some sort of sour jellies. Overall though, the looks are the main feature of this orchid. I would not purchase it for the fragrance. There are other orchids much more fragrant than it. The flower is quite large as well. It measures around 6 centimeters, which is around 2.5 inches, and I find that to be quite big when referring to polychilous type Phalaenopsis. The plant itself has more lime green leaves, which again is reminiscent of the Violacea in its parentage. The leaves are also a lot glossier than the typical Phalaenopsis. And overall, I do find that this plant blooms more in the warmer season, so I wouldn't go out of my way to give it much of a cool down in the autumn, since the actual Phalaenopsis subgenus, orchids in its parentage, accumulate to only 25% of the heritage. There is a bit of a downside to this orchid. It is not tiny, it is quite big, and I do believe it can grow to a sort of a medium size if we refer to the flower shop Phalaenopsis. Although mine is still recovering from some sort of stress, I don't envision it growing much bigger than this. But yeah, it is not a tiny orchid. Also, the flower spikes are not very compact, but they are quite long, so they don't stay close to the plant as much as other polychilous. Overall, it is very easy to grow, takes the same care as any other polychilous type Phalaenopsis, and if you're a beginner, check the description, I'll share with you my tutorial. As for where you can purchase this orchid, I doubt you will find it at the flower shop unless you are very lucky. Try online nurseries, you'll have much better luck there. I purchased mine from the EU many years ago. Usually with orchids, stock comes and goes, so you need to be a little patient, have a big wish list, and keep your eyes open because at some point it will appear in nurseries. A last detail, apparently the variety Boni Vasquez is an awarded one. It received an award of merit from the American Orchid Society, but there are other varieties as well which look slightly different. From what I see on the internet, I think the Boni Vasquez is the better looking one, but check the Orchidverse website, which I'm going to link you to down below, to see the other varieties as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's orchid. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Do you have this orchid? Do you plan on putting it on your wish list? Hope this video helped. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye! This is Phalaenopsis gigantea, an orchid species endemic to the island of Borneo. As the name suggests, it is gigantic. In fact, it is the biggest known Phalaenopsis species. This species has become one of my favorite Phalaenopsis. Not only are the flowers absolutely striking, like any polychilous has, but the foliage and overall look of the orchid is absolutely wild. In my experience, this orchid has the most leaning tendency of all Phalaenopsis. While it's absolutely normal for Phalaenopsis orchids to lean to one side, generally the side that receives most light, such as a window, the gigantea takes it to a whole new level. No matter if mounted or potted, it will lean very steeply towards the light source, and even if the light source comes from above, it will still find a place, or rather a side, to lean. I currently grow it under artificial light, with lights only from above, and as you can see, it is still leaning quite steeply. This makes it a little bit harder to display. Since the leaves will grow so large, it needs to be high on a pedestal or hanging somewhere. That is, if you're not growing it already on a mount or on a tree, why not? Maybe you have the good climate. So from a display point of view, it can pose a few difficulties in a home, but I do not believe it is impossible, because in essence, it is a Phalaenopsis, it's vigorous and will manage, and it absolutely does not mind home conditions. Yes, you can grow this in a home without humidifiers or any automated systems like in a greenhouse. Apart from the beautiful shape, and the size of the leaves, you might have noticed the coloration. This is normal and absolutely natural. The gigantea has a bluish-greenish type of color. Moreover, it is glaucous, which means it has a sheen on top of the leaves that gives it a misty appearance. This actually protects it from getting wet. I would advise you not to try and remove this sheen or try to polish the leaves in any way, and rubbing that sheen will just make the leaves look a lot duller, trust me. And it will remove that layer of protection against water, which is especially useful in cultivation. It blooms from in between the leaves like any other Phalaenopsis on a very long and quite thick flower spike. Unlike other Phalaenopsis, the flower spike tends to grow downwards. Initially, the flower spike started to grow inside the pot. I caught it early, I removed it from the medium and directed it over the edge of the pot. So if you own this orchid, keep an eye out for flower spikes. They can actually grow inside the pot. It is described as a sequential bloomer, meaning it can rebloom from the very same flower spike for quite a number of times, maybe even a few years. So do not cut the flower spike after it's done blooming. Even if it looks a little bit strange, it might actually rebloom again. The flowers are also thick and glossy like many other polychilous have. They are buttery white and have a dotted pattern that can vary a little bit from maroon to a little bit more brighter dark red. Unlike other Phalaenopsis, which tend to display their blooms on each side, let's say of the flower spike, creating a nice shingling effect, I observed that the gigantea opens its flowers no matter the direction, pretty much on all sides of the flower spike, creating a wonderful 3D effect. When it's in bud, honestly, it looks like grapes. The party trick of the flowers is that they are fragrant. I see the scent is described as citrusy, and I will have to agree to some extent. It is indeed sour, lemony, but it has a very sharp, slightly dusty underlayer. It's not bad by any means. I actually really like it. It reminds me of scented erasers from childhood. Did anybody have those? It feels like a very artificial fragrance, but it's absolutely beautiful. But it does have a harshness to it. It is quite strong. I could feel it in the plant room, even though this orchid sits in a rootstock cabinet with the doors closed. The way the flowers look, coupled with the scent, make it magical to me. I cannot wait for future reblooms. Mine is a very young plant at this point. She will grow very tall, and the more mature it is, the more flowers it will produce. Now, care-wise, if you want a very in-depth tutorial, check the description. I will link you to it down below. It takes the very same care as any other polychilous type Phalaenopsis. It does not depend on that drop in temperature in the autumn or winter to rebloom. The warmer or hotter, the better, but it really is sensitive to direct sunshine. So the rule of never put it in direct hot noon sun definitely applies. It can do very well in bright shade, but I do feel it really likes my grow lights, and it's quite close to them. So definitely it can handle higher amounts of light, just as long as the leaves are cool. When they overheat is when sunburn happens. I do find that it is quite a big root producer, and considering the size, I would imagine this orchid does produce quite a heavy root system. Those leaves are expensive, quote unquote. They require a lot of energy, so I feel like this orchid will produce a lot of roots. So be careful with the pot size. Don't go too small with the pot. Mine is already outgrowing her pot after about a year in the same pot, and I feel like I want to go directly to maybe an 18-centimeter pot. Yeah. But other than that, really, she's a joy. I fully recommend it to any Phalaenopsis lover. Typically, you will find it for sale at young ages, but just be patient. It is a slow grower, but it doesn't have to be very big to be blooming size. Mine is on its first bloom, and the leaves are about 35 centimeters in length. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video and the gigantea, and I hope to see you next time. Bye! This is Phalaenopsis speciosa, a Phalaenopsis species endemic to northwestern Sumatra. Now, there is a little bit of a debate if the speciosa and Tetraspecie 1 are the same orchid. To be honest, I could not find the answer, not sure if taxonomists agree just yet, and from my own personal experience, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between them. So for now, I will refer to both of these species, but in the future, they might turn out to be two different orchids. In any case, they behave the same, and the flowering behavior of this orchid is its main attraction. The flowers can be white, red, or a combination of white and red. I think you've noticed already that flowers don't necessarily look identical to each other, and this is because this orchid can always bloom slightly different. We can have a flower that has only white petals or only red petals, although I find it to be pretty rare, or most commonly a combination of red and white petals and sepals, or white flowers with red splashes of color. This behavior is not only unique in the Phalaenopsis kingdom, but also the entire orchid kingdom. To my knowledge, there isn't another orchid which performs this way, other than possibly hybrids of this orchid. And for me, this is the whole thrill of this orchid, because other than that, it really is a very typical polychilous type Phalaenopsis. The foliage is light green in color and very glossy, very typical to polychilous subgenus type Phalaenopsis orchids. And also the fragrance is not really something to write home about. When we have something like the Bellina to compare to, nothing really can come close. There is a bit of a fragrance which I find slightly fruity, but it's very mild and certainly I would not buy this orchid for the fragrance. Another detail that I really like about it is the fuzzy lip, which again is something not extraordinarily common with Phalaenopsis orchids in the polychilous subgenus and not only. And just like any other summer bloomer type Phalaenopsis, it blooms throughout the year as long as it's warm. In environments which do experience a cooler winter, this orchid might stop blooming during the winter, but it is indeed sequential, meaning the flower spikes can rebloom for quite a few years. So if your orchid is healthy, cutting them is not a good idea because they can definitely rebloom as the orchid creates new flower spikes. So in the end, you can actually have a pretty impressive inflorescence altogether. I find this orchid tends to stay pretty small. Again, if we compare it to something like the Bellina even, or the gigantea, it is quite tiny. Maybe not as tiny as miniature Phalaenopsis, but pretty close in my opinion. Also, the leaves appear to be slightly slender, so not that broad shape that we all know and love with miniature Phalaenopsis. But really, other than that, it takes the same type of care like any other polychilous type Phalaenopsis. And in the description you will find a link towards my tutorial so you can learn more if you want to, but I find it to be very easy for beginners as well, especially for those of you who live in very warm climates and usually have issues reblooming flower shop Phalaenopsis due to the temperature. This is the type of orchid you don't usually find in flower shops, unless you're extremely lucky, but for the vast majority of us, most probably resorting to orchid nurseries is necessary. So try to find one online or maybe in your area, and since this is a very popular orchid, it's really not rare at all. It's kind of a staple in the orchid hobby. I'm sure at some point you will find it available in stock. Price-wise should not be extreme either, should be kinda very similar to other polychilous type Phalaenopsis, and that kind of wraps it up about the Tetraspis. Oh, sorry, speciosa, see? Even I confused them. Let me know in the comments, do you have this orchid? Do you enjoy it? How does it bloom for you? And did you ever get a fully red flower? Because I actually purchased the so-called Tetraspis C1 red. Will it bloom only red? I don't know, we're gonna see. But up until now, I have never had a fully red flower. I did have white, but not red. Alright, so that's about it. Thanks for watching, bye! This is Paphiopedilum Vanda M. Pearman, a primary hybrid between the Paphiopedilum delinati and Paphiopedilum bellatulum. According to the Orchid Roots website, it was registered in 1939. It is an old hybrid, but I do believe it's a very good one, and I see it's quite popular. I do tend to see it quite a lot in orchid nurseries. And for good reason, I think. It's one of my biggest flowered Paphiopedilum, if not the biggest one. And I do believe this trait comes from the bellatulum, which has that beautiful puppy shape to it. I don't know why it looks like that to me, but I see it has droopy little ears and overall a cute type of a face. It's just what it inspires me. And you'll be happy to hear that it takes the very same care as any other Paphiopedilum orchid, which I do have a tutorial for geared towards beginners. You can find down below this tutorial, but feel free to also search on YouTube my name followed by Paphiopedilum orchids to see all of the videos that I did on paphs. I don't find it takes any different type of care, or there isn't anything specific about this one which should make it more difficult. Even if you've purchased your path from the flower shop and you do good with it, I think you should do great with this one as well. Now the flowers have a very nice, sweet pink hue to them and a lot of spots. I love spots. And ever since I had slipper orchids, I dreamed of having a pink one. And I have to say, having this particular one makes me not necessarily look for other pink paths. It is just that gorgeous and very subtle. It is not an in-your-face color. It is quite subdued, but I find it invites you to take a closer look. The flowers are not fragrant, despite the fact that people say the Delenati is fragrant. I never experienced it, to be honest, but I can tell you this one doesn't have a fragrance. Maybe it has to do with my environment, I'm not entirely sure. I would not expect fragrance is all I'm trying to say, so you're just not disappointed. It is a rather large Paphiopedilum, certainly does not stay tiny like the Delenati, but the coloration and the pattern on the leaf do certainly remind me of that parent. The color is very dark and I find it has a sort of a blue sheen to it. And just look at that pattern. It looks like it has fenestrations, but it's not. It doesn't have holes. It is just the coloration. Leaves are very sturdy. They're not flimsy in any way. They are rugged. When you touch them, they're not glossy in any way. And the underside is actually purple. This is a lower light plant and the coloration under the leaves is fairly common with these types of plants. Just think of prayer plants. I do believe it has to do with light absorption and actually maximizing the little light available to these types of plants. This year I seem to have 2 flowers on the same flower spike. In previous years I only had 1, but I do see it is possible for this orchid to have multiple flowers. Don't imagine 5, I wouldn't really go that far, but 2 flowers it is very possible to have on a flower spike. So all in all, it is a typical slipper orchid, very easy to care for in your home. I personally grow it under grow lights, but definitely you can do well in natural light in a shaded location, very similar to Phalaenopsis light. So remember, you have a care tutorial in the description. And with that said, I hope you've enjoyed this spotlight and I hope you have a great day. Bye!